still behind the scenes, I see. Some things never change. That's what the bride sneered before the cameras flashed. Danielle Pierce smiled anyway, because she'd learned long ago that grace could wound deeper than vengeance. But when Elias Monroe, the billionaire she once loved and lost, took her hand in front of everyone who'd erased her, the room froze. What started as a dance turned into a reckoning, and when the truth finally surfaced, it wasn't his empire that fell apart. It was the lie they'd all been living. Stay with us. Because what begins as humiliation ends in revelation. At a wedding built on appearances, one dance will expose everything they tried to bury. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated, only to let your truth speak louder than their power? The envelope lay on Elias Monroe's desk like a taunt wrapped in gold. Heavy cardstock, embossed lettering, a scent of expensive roses still clinging to it. Vivienne Leclerc and Henry Beaumont invite you to celebrate their union. He didn't finish reading. His jaw flexed, eyes dark as he tossed the invitation aside. The irony wasn't lost on him. The woman who once demanded a ring from him now had one from someone else, and she'd mailed him the announcement like a final performance. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city pulsed beneath a gray sky. Elias stood still in his tailored vest, one hand buried in his pocket, the other tracing the gold edge of the invitation. He told himself he didn't care. He told himself he was too busy to waste time at another society wedding, especially one that had once been his. But then he saw the handwritten note at the bottom. Vivienne and Henry would be honored to have Monroe International among our guests. A business move, of course. Even heartbreak came with PR benefits in their world. Naomi entered the office without knocking, all sharp wit and teenage intuition. "You got that look again," she said, dropping her backpack on the leather couch. At 16, she had her mother's eyes and her father's composure. "What's wrong this time?" "Nothing," he said too quickly. She glanced at the envelope. "You're not really going, are you?" "I don't attend ceremonies built on history I'd rather forget." Naomi tilted her head, studying him the way only a daughter could. "Maybe that's why you should. Forgetting doesn't always mean healing, Dad. Sometimes you have to look it in the face." Elias sighed. Naomi had a way of cutting through the armor he wore in every boardroom. "You sound too much like your grandmother," he murmured. "Maybe she's right," Naomi said. "You can't close every door you've walked through." That evening, long after she'd gone, Elias reopened the envelope. The wedding would be held at Château Beaumont. Of course it would. All marble terraces and vineyards that glowed gold in summer light. He poured himself a drink, the amber liquid trembling slightly in the glass. Maybe Naomi was right. Maybe this wasn't about Vivienne at all. Maybe it was about finally walking through the fire without burning. Across town, Danielle Pierce reviewed a stack of press notes for the Beaumont Gala. Her phone buzzed with a new message. Final guest list confirmed. Elias Monroe, attending. Her hand froze mid-air, her breath catching for just a second before she steadied herself. She pressed the phone face down and whispered, "Not again." Neither of them knew that the night they'd both been avoiding for years was already waiting for them. The sun dripped gold over the rolling vineyards as the cars began arriving one by one, their chrome gleaming against the stone facade of Château Beaumont. Photographers lined the red-carpeted steps, flashes igniting like small lightning bolts across the courtyard. Laughter rippled through the air, polished and practiced, the kind born from people who spent their lives pretending they belonged. And among them, Elias Monroe stepped from his car with the calm authority of a man who didn't need to belong anywhere, because everywhere already bent subtly around him. His tuxedo was perfectly cut, matte black against the deep bronze of his skin. No tie, just an open collar and quiet confidence. Whispers began before he reached the door, his name carried like perfume. Elias Monroe's here. The ex. He ignored them, only pausing briefly when a camera flash caught the scar near his temple. The faint reminder of another life, another fight. Inside, chandeliers spilled warm light across marble floors. The scent of roses filled the grand hall, cloying but elegant. Waiters floated by with champagne trays that glittered like constellations. Elias accepted a glass, more as armor than indulgence. He moved slowly, surveying the room with detached curiosity until his gaze froze. Across the ballroom, near the staircase, Danielle Pierce was orchestrating chaos into perfection. Her headset gleamed under the light, her emerald silk gown falling like liquid over her frame, a deliberate rebellion against the sea of ivory and gold. She was directing photographers, her voice calm but firm. Keep the press line clear. The bride enters in 10. Her focus was total, until she felt it, that unmistakable gravity pulling her gaze across the room. When their eyes met, everything around them dimmed. The laughter, the clinking glasses, even the music. 6 years of silence collapsed in that single glance. Elias didn't move, didn't smile, just studied her as if his memory had never truly forgotten her shape. Danielle's breath caught, her fingers tightening around the clipboard she didn't realize she was still holding. She turned away too quickly, murmuring something to an assistant, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Elias stayed where he was, watching her work the room with quiet command. Every gesture of hers was precision, every word tempered by professionalism. But he saw through it. Beneath the poise was the same woman who once challenged him to see beyond himself. Outside, the music swelled again. Inside, the air between them was already charged, like the split second before lightning strikes. Neither spoke, but both knew it. The night had only just begun, and the past had come dressed for the occasion. The music from the ballroom faded into a dull hum as Elias stood near the window, watching rain begin to trace delicate paths down the glass. He shouldn't have come. The scent of roses and champagne was starting to feel suffocating, dragging memories out from the corners of his mind where he'd locked them away. And then, as a violin note trembled through the hall, he saw her again, not in emerald silk, but in the soft gray suit she used to wear when the nights at Monroe International ran too long. 6 years melted away. The clatter of the city outside, the glow of floor lamps, the sharp click of Danielle's pen as she rewrote yet another press release to save his empire. It was 2 in the morning. She'd kicked off her heels, her locks falling from the bun she always started perfectly and ended in chaos. "You don't have to stay," he had told her, his tie already loosened, exhaustion in his voice. She hadn't looked up. "If I don't, who will make sure you don't bury yourself under all that pride?" Elias had smiled then, a real smile, the kind that never made it into magazines. "You talk to me like no one else dares to. That's because no one else remembers you're human," she said softly, her fingers brushing his as she handed him the corrected statement. The contact had been brief, but it lingered, electric, dangerous. They both knew there were lines they couldn't cross, but late nights blurred rules. Coffee turned to conversation, conversation to laughter, laughter to silence charged with things unsaid. And when silence wasn't enough, he kissed her, gently, desperately, like a man realizing too late what he'd been missing. The fallout came fast, a leaked report, a photograph of Elias leaving a hotel he'd never stayed in, tied to a scandal he hadn't created. Monroe International's stock trembled. The board demanded a scapegoat. Danielle stepped forward before he could speak. "Let it be me," she said. "You can't afford this." He'd tried to stop her, but she was gone by morning, resigned, unreachable, and replaced within a week. He searched for her at first, then stopped when his pride convinced him she didn't want to be found. Now, standing in the golden light of Chateau Beaumont, Elias felt that same ache rise again. Across the room, Danielle laughed at something a guest said, but her eyes darted once, just once, toward him. And in that fleeting glance, he knew she remembered everything too. The reception glimmered like a dream carved from glass and envy. Every table was dressed in ivory linen, every chandelier dripping with crystal tears. Laughter echoed beneath the high ceilings, rehearsed and hollow, as the orchestra played its perfect, soulless waltz. Elias stood near the edge of the crowd, his expression unreadable, a man sculpted from control, but his gaze never strayed far from Danielle. She was stationed near the press line, clipboard in hand, pretending the whispers didn't reach her, pretending she didn't feel the eyes that followed her through the room, not with curiosity, but with calculation. And then came the voice she'd prayed to avoid all evening. "Danielle Pierce," Vivienne Leclerc cooed, her smile sugary enough to sting. The bride floated forward in a champagne silk gown that shimmered like deceit itself. "Still behind the scenes, I see. Some things never change." Danielle forced a polite smile. "Some of us prefer to build the moment instead of standing in it." A flicker of annoyance crossed Vivienne's perfect face, but she recovered quickly. "How noble. I imagine working for a foundation is much quieter than working for Monroe International." The words landed soft, but the meaning cut deep. Before Danielle could reply, Elias stepped closer, his presence commanding enough to silence half the room. "Vivienne," he greeted evenly, his voice smooth as aged bourbon. "Beautiful wedding." "Henry's a fortunate man." Vivienne's composure faltered for just a heartbeat. "Elias," she said, feigning grace, "I didn't think you'd come." "Neither did I," he said simply, raising his glass. "But I'm glad I did. It's always good to see what I've outgrown." Gasps fluttered around them like startled birds. Vivienne's smile thinned to glass. Danielle's pulse hammered. The crowd shifted, murmuring, and somewhere near the bar, someone whispered the rumor that had been circling for months. "Monroe International is drowning. He sold half his holdings. The empire's slipping." Danielle pretended not to hear. She sipped her champagne, hand trembling only slightly, but her mind was racing. She knew the truth behind that rumor, because she'd helped him bury it years ago. She'd watched him sacrifice everything he loved for a reputation he could never touch without gloves. Across the room, Elias caught her eye, a silent exchange between two people who understood the cost of keeping appearances. She lifted her glass toward him, the tremor almost gone now, and their eyes locked in quiet defiance, two ghosts in a room full of spectators, both carrying secrets no one else could name. The orchestra shifted from polite background noise to something lush and consuming. Violins rose like breath, cellos hummed like memory. Vivienne and her new husband glided into the center of the ballroom, every motion choreographed for admiration. Guests circled with adoring smiles, champagne glasses raised high, cameras flashed, freezing their happiness into something that looked real enough to believe. Danielle stood near the edge of the dance floor, pretending to study the event program while her pulse thudded in her ears. She had done her job. The lights, the timing, the press. Everything was flawless. But as Vivienne twirled in her glittering gown, Danielle felt the edges of the room begin to blur. She could feel Elias's gaze on her, steady and unyielding, as if he were seeing through all her practiced composure. The song ended in a swell of applause, and the next melody began. Slower, richer, intimate. Couples moved forward to join the dance, the crowd shifting like tidewater around a single point. Then Elias moved. His stride was calm, assured, but it carried a weight that made heads turn. Conversations fell silent one by one until only the music remained. He stopped in front of her. For a moment, no one breathed. "Dance with me," he said, the words low enough for her alone, yet they seemed to echo across the hall. Danielle's hand tightened around her clipboard. She opened her mouth to decline, but the sound never came. His eyes weren't arrogant this time. They were steady, searching, almost regretful. Slowly, she set the clipboard aside. The silence deepened. And then, as if moved by something older than pride, she placed her hand in his. The room erupted into murmurs. Flashbulbs flickered, but Elias didn't look away from her. He drew her closer, one hand resting carefully at the small of her back, the other holding hers like something fragile. The orchestra's rhythm slowed to match their steps, measured, deliberate, almost reverent. Danielle tried to steady her breathing. His cologne was the same, cedar and restraint. His heartbeat, faint through his jacket, matched the tempo of her own. "People are watching," she murmured. "Let them," he replied. "They've seen everything but the truth." She looked up at him, her eyes questioning, but he didn't explain. The truth wasn't for the room to know. It was the silence between them, the apology he hadn't spoken, the love she hadn't forgotten. When the music ended, neither moved. The applause was polite, distant. Only when she stepped back did he finally exhale. And in that single breath, 6 years of distance collapsed into something dangerously alive again. Applause rippled through the ballroom as the final notes faded, but the warmth never reached Vivian's smile. She stood at the edge of the dance floor, her fingers tightening around her crystal flute until the stem threatened to snap. Every guest had seen it. Elias Monroe dancing with her event planner like she was the only woman in the room. Every camera had caught the way his gaze lingered. Vivian's laughter returned on cue when her new husband rejoined her, but the sound was brittle. Danielle was already gathering her things, her pulse still uneven from the dance. She told herself it was exhaustion, not emotion, but her hands trembled as she reached for her headset. The night was almost over. If she could make it another hour, she could disappear back into the quiet life she had built, far from the weight of the Monroe name. "Leaving so soon?" The voice behind her was sugar-laced with venom. Vivian stepped into the hallway, gown trailing like spilled champagne. How convenient. Wreck the evening and vanish before the mess dries. Danielle turned slowly, forcing calm into her posture. "Mrs. Beaumont," she began, keeping her tone professional, "if there's an issue with the schedule." "Don't patronize me," Vivian snapped. "You planned this. You wanted him to look at you. You think you can humiliate me in front of everyone on my wedding day?" Her words hit like slaps, sharp and loud enough to draw the attention of nearby guests. Danielle felt heat rise in her chest but held her ground. "You asked me to run this event, and I did. Perfectly. Whatever you think you saw on that dance floor, that wasn't a plan. That was closure." Vivian laughed, brittle and cruel. "Closure? Please. Men like Elias don't change. They just circle back to what makes them feel powerful." "Funny," came a voice from behind her. Elias's tone was low, but every syllable carried steel. "Because if that's true, I would have stayed with you." The hallway fell silent. Vivienne turned, her face blanching as she met his gaze. Cameras, always drawn to tension, began to drift closer. Elias stepped forward, his patience stripped bare. "Enough, Vivian. You married the wrong man if you're still measuring yourself against me." A dozen flashes went off like miniature storms. The crowd whispered, some half smiling, others gleeful. Danielle looked away, her stomach twisting. She hadn't wanted this, her name tangled with his again. But by morning, it would be everywhere. The dance, the confrontation, the woman behind the scandal. Elias exhaled, jaw tight, but the damage was already done. And somewhere deep down, Danielle knew the night had only just begun to unravel. Rain slicked the cobblestones outside the château as Danielle marched through the courtyard, her heels striking sharp against the stone. Her emerald gown clung to her as she crossed the marble lobby, ignoring the stares that followed her. The headlines were already brewing. She could feel them like static in the air. The dance, the outburst, the former flame, and all of it had his name and hers. She didn't knock when she reached the suite. The door opened before she could. Elias standing there, jacket gone, sleeves rolled to his forearms. He looked too calm, and that only fueled her anger. "You just made everything worse," she snapped, brushing past him. "You couldn't let it go for one night, could you? You had to make it about you." Elias closed the door quietly, unshaken. "If defending you is making it about me, then maybe I should have done it years ago." She spun to face him, eyes flashing. "Defending me? You humiliated her. You humiliated yourself. And now I'm the headline again." He stepped closer, his voice steady, but low. "You think I care about their headlines? Let them write what they want. The truth doesn't change." "The truth?" She laughed bitterly. "You mean the rumor that Monroe International is drowning? Because that's all they're whispering tonight." Elias's expression didn't waver. "The company isn't failing," he said quietly. "I sold one of my divisions. The press spun it into collapse because I let them." Danielle blinked, confusion softening her anger for the first time. "You let them? Why?" He walked to the desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a thin folder. "Because the sale funded something more important." He handed it to her. Inside, neatly printed on letterhead, was the charter for the Pierce Foundation for Women in Leadership. Her name at the top, her vision, words she'd once spoken to him after a late-night strategy meeting, now etched into something real. Her throat tightened. She couldn't finish. "You gave up your career for me," he said, his voice roughened by truth. "You think I forgot? You took the fall, and I built an empire on your silence. That money wasn't penance, Danielle. It was gratitude." She closed the folder slowly, her eyes glistening but fierce. "You can't buy forgiveness, Elias." "I'm not trying to," he replied softly. "I'm trying to remind you that not everything between us was a lie." The rain outside grew heavier, tapping against the glass like an echo of everything left unsaid. And for the first time in 6 years, neither of them reached for an umbrella. Morning light poured through the wide glass windows of Elias's penthouse, soft and golden against the steel and silence. The storm had passed, but its echo still lingered in the air. Naomi moved quietly through the study, her father's sanctuary, a place she was never really supposed to linger. His world of dark mahogany and hidden truths. She was looking for a textbook she'd left the week before, but instead her fingers brushed against something buried at the back of a shelf. A frame, simple, dusty, and inside it, a moment that felt alive despite the years. Her father, younger, smiling, an unguarded kind of smile she'd never seen in real life. And beside him, a woman, brown-skinned, radiant, elegant in a navy gown. Danielle. Naomi froze, studying their faces. They weren't posing, they were caught. The kind of picture that happens when people forget the camera exists. Elias's hand rested gently at Danielle's back. Their eyes turned toward each other instead of the lens. The caption at the bottom read, "Monroe Foundation Gala, 2017. Her chest tightened. She had always suspected there was more to the way her father looked when Danielle's name came up on television. Now she knew. When he entered the study the next morning, coffee in hand, Naomi was waiting in the leather chair across from his desk. The photo sat between them like evidence. He froze mid-step. "Where did you find that?" he asked quietly. "Hidden," Naomi said simply, "like everything else." Elias sighed, setting his cup down with a soft clink. That picture was from a long time ago. "I can see that," Naomi replied. "You look happy. Both of you." She studied him, her tone calm but cutting. "Were you ever going to tell me?" Elias leaned against the desk, eyes tracing the window instead of her. "Some memories hurt less when they stay buried." Naomi shook her head slowly. "Maybe they only heal when you dig them up." He looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment, the weight he carried showed. "It wasn't just a story I wanted to forget," he said. "It was a mistake I didn't know how to fix." "She doesn't look like a mistake," Naomi said softly, her voice trembling at the edges. Silence filled the room, thick, alive, unspoken things pressing between them. Finally, Elias picked up the frame, wiping away the dust with his thumb. "No," he said, almost to himself. "She never was." Outside, the city stirred awake, but inside the study, time stayed still, caught, like that photograph, between what once was and what still could be. The rain returned that evening, harder this time, thick sheets hammering against the city, turning every streetlight into a smear of gold and water. Elias sat alone in his suite, the storm matching the unrest inside him. He had been staring at the old photograph Naomi had found, the one he hadn't been able to throw away. He should have known better than to hide the past. The past had a way of knocking until you opened the door. A knock came now, sharp, reluctant. He knew it before he rose from the chair. Danielle stood in the doorway, her coat soaked, hair damp, eyes unreadable. She looked like the storm itself, beautiful, furious, uncontainable. "I shouldn't be here," she said, voice trembling slightly. "Then why are you?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, stepping inside as thunder rolled behind her. "Because there's something I never told you. Something I should have said a long time ago." Elias gestured for her to sit, but she stayed standing, arms crossed, like she needed the distance to breathe. "You've asked why I left," she began. "Why I vanished after the scandal. You thought it was pride, or anger, or betrayal. It wasn't any of those things." The air between them tightened. "Then what was it?" Her breath hitched. "I was pregnant, Elias." The words fell heavy, final, cutting through the hum of rain. "I found out a week after I resigned. I wanted to tell you, but the world was already tearing us apart, and I couldn't bear the headlines, the pity, so I left. I thought I could start over, raise the baby quietly, but—" her voice cracked, soft and raw. "I lost it. A few months later, alone." Elias's body went still, like the world had stopped turning. His hand gripped the back of a chair for balance. "Danielle." She looked away, her shoulders trembling. "I told myself I was protecting you. But the truth is, I didn't want you to see me broken. I didn't want to become another thing you felt responsible for." He crossed the room before she could step back, rain still dripping from her coat onto the marble. "You should never have carried that pain alone," he said, his voice low but shaking. "You shouldn't have had to." Her eyes met his, tired, brave, wet with unshed tears. "We both carried things we shouldn't have," she whispered. "Yours was guilt. Mine was grief." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, something quiet broke open. A silence years in the making, now finally set free. By the time the after-party began, the story had already spread like perfume, sweet, heavy, impossible to ignore. Guests whispered in corners, the orchestra's soft jazz barely masking their speculation. The dance, the argument, the storm that had followed. Every smile in the ballroom was tight, every glance a question waiting to be answered. Danielle arrived late, dressed simply this time, her hair swept back, her face calm but pale. She didn't want to be here, but she had work to finish. Press releases, closing statements, the kind of cleanup that came after chaos. The moment she stepped inside, though, she knew something had shifted. Conversations stilled. Eyes followed her every move. Across the room, Vivian stood near the bar, her new husband's arm long forgotten as she refilled her glass again and again. The satin of her gown shimmered under the lights, but her expression had curdled into something sharp. "Look who decided to join us," she said loudly as Danielle passed. "The woman of the hour. Tell me, do you always ruin other people's weddings or only the ones you wish were yours?" Laughter rippled from a few guests, nervous, eager to please. Danielle's stomach twisted, but she didn't flinch. "Congratulations again, Mrs. Beaumont," she said quietly. "I hope the night still feels like yours." Vivienne stepped closer, voice rising. "Oh, it's mine. You just can't stand that he chose me in the end." Elias appeared near the doorway, tension flickering in his jaw. But before he could reach them, another voice cut through the noise. "Chose you?" Naomi's tone was calm but icy, slicing through the room. The crowd turned to see her standing just a few feet away, her posture regal despite her youth. "My father didn't choose anyone that night. He defended someone who deserved it." Vivienne's lips parted in shock. "And you are?" "Naomi Monroe," she said, chin lifted. "Elias's daughter." Gasps circled the room. She took a step closer, her voice steady. "That woman you're mocking? She's the reason you still get to sip champagne and take pictures in front of that logo you love so much. When my father's company almost fell apart, Danielle took the blame. She saved everything you worship." The room fell utterly still. Cameras stopped clicking. Even the band faltered. Vivian's face blanched, her bravado cracking as the weight of Naomi's words hung in the air. Elias finally joined them, resting a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Enough has been said," he murmured. But it didn't need to be. The truth had already reshaped the room, silence blooming where gossip had lived, respect where cruelty had thrived. The party had dissolved into fragments of perfume and footsteps, the grand lights of the château dimming one by one until only the gardens glowed faintly under the rain. Danielle stepped outside, her heels sinking slightly into the wet earth. The air smelled of roses and thunder, of endings and something else she couldn't name. She needed quiet, away from the whispers, away from the flashbulbs that had fed on her name all evening. Behind her, the door creaked open. Elias followed, his jacket draped over one arm, his expression unreadable but tired. The kind of tired that came from years of pretending power could replace peace. He didn't speak at first. He just stood beside her beneath the dripping canopy of vines, the sound of rain softening around them. "I never wanted it to happen like that," he said finally. His voice was low, stripped of its usual polish. "Naomi shouldn't have had to defend either of us." Danielle kept her eyes on the gravel path. She spoke truth. Something most people here have forgotten how to do. Elias nodded slowly, then looked at her. "I owe you more than truth. I owe you an apology, not as a man who signs checks or gives speeches, but as the one who should have stayed when it mattered." The rain grew heavier, drumming softly against the leaves. He continued, his tone quiet but certain. "I can't rewrite the past, Danielle. I can't change what I let the world take from us. but I can honor it by never running from it again." For a moment, she didn't move. Her hand traced the stem of a rain-soaked rose, droplets gathering at her fingertips. "You always had a way with promises," she said, a faint, sad smile ghosting her lips. "It's what made people believe in you. Even me." He took a step closer. "Then let me prove it. Let me—" She turned to him, eyes glistening in the half-light. "You don't have to prove anything tonight." Her voice was steady, tender, but final. "Just don't run. Not from this moment. Not from what's left of it." He studied her face, the same one that had haunted his silence for 6 long years. Then, quietly, he extended his hand, not in possession, but in peace. She looked down at it, then back up at him. "Walk me home," she said softly. And under the soft hum of cicadas and rain, they did. 2 silhouettes crossing the garden, not toward a beginning or an ending, but toward the fragile truth that sometimes forgiveness doesn't need words at all. The ballroom shimmered with light, the kind that came from new beginnings rather than chandeliers. Months had passed since the night of the wedding, the storm, the confessions, the unraveling, and yet the memory of it lingered like perfume in the corners of their minds. Tonight, though, belonged to something different. The banners read, "The Pierce Foundation Gala, Empowering Women, Rebuilding Futures." Danielle's dream, the one she had once buried beneath heartbreak and survival, now standing tall in gold lettering for the world to see. Elias stood near the back, deliberately out of the spotlight. His tuxedo was simpler this time, his presence quieter, his eyes steady on the stage. Danielle stood there, radiant in a midnight blue gown, speaking to a room full of people who admired her strength without ever knowing the full price of it. "Resilience," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly through the hall, "isn't just about standing tall when the world tries to break you. It's about bending with grace, choosing kindness when bitterness would be easier, and allowing pain to become purpose." Applause rose like a wave, but Elias didn't move. He could see the flicker of emotion in her smile, the same mixture of poise and vulnerability that had always undone him. Danielle's gaze swept the crowd, pausing when it found him. For a brief moment, the noise faded. She didn't falter or glance away. She just smiled, small and knowing, and gave the faintest nod, as if to say, "I see you, I remember." When the speeches ended and the music began, guests flooded the dance floor in a swirl of color and laughter. Elias hesitated at first, watching her move through the crowd, gracious and unshaken, shaking hands, thanking donors. But then, without ceremony, he stepped forward. She saw him before he reached her. No cameras flashed this time, no murmurs followed. He extended his hand, and she accepted it without a word. The orchestra played softly. No grand melody, just the kind of rhythm made for 2 people who had nothing left to prove. They moved slowly, a quiet echo of the dance that had once set the world aflame. His hand rested lightly against her back, hers over his heart. There was no tension now, no unspoken war between them, only stillness, the kind that feels like peace. As the final note lingered, Danielle looked up at him, her smile soft but sure. "I'm glad you came," she whispered. "So am I," he replied. And as they swayed in the fading light, the story that had begun in ambition and ended in forgiveness found its final rhythm, not in passion, but in understanding. Because sometimes the most powerful love story isn't about what began, but what was finally understood. If you felt that moment when he asked her to dance, share this story. Someone out there has stood where she stood, face to face with the past, surrounded by whispers, choosing grace over chaos. Remind her that elegance is its own form of power, Comment below if you've ever been underestimated, and let your truth rewrite the room. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, drop a comment, and share it with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe to Black Stories Untold for more stories that uncover hidden struggles, celebrate strength, and remind us that every voice matters.